Hello, everybody out there in the interweb world. Welcome back to the next conversation that we're having as part of Empowerthon, which is the inaugural fundraiser for Parent Tween Foundation. I'm super excited to have William Zenobia with us. He is the author of A Stranger in the Home: 8 Ways to Create Communication, Healing, and Peace as a Step Parent. So, William, hi. Thanks for being with me. How are you?
I am awesome. Thank you so much for having me on. This is such a parenting and step parenting is so near and dear to my heart. I am grateful to be on here today, and I'm doing
Awesome.
wonderful.
I'm thrilled to have you because there are so many families who are navigating the trickiness of step parenting and blending families in today's society. So we'll get to that in just a second. Couple of housekeeping tips for folks tuning in. We are streaming live into our Facebook group, to our YouTube page, and to our YouTube channel, rather, and to our LinkedIn page. I do have our Facebook group open on another monitor. So if you've got questions and you're in the group, go ahead and ask them. I can also see if we have new member requests. So if you do and you want to come on over and join us as we chat, I can bring you in. Just make sure that you answer at least one of the questions. So that way I know you've read the group rules. And if you're tuning in on our YouTube channel or our LinkedIn page, go ahead and comment there. We just don't see all of those as we talk, but we'll get back to you and comment along the way. Also, this is part of Empowerthon, which I mentioned is the inaugural fundraiser for Parent Tween Foundation. What's Parent Tween Foundation? It is our mission is to bridge the financial gap that so frequently exists between families and the help that they need. So it is the nonprofit leg of the Parent Tween Connection. So since it is a fundraiser, there will be a shameless request to open your credit card up and say thank you to William with a donation at the end, but we'll get there. So, step parenting. I know I could probably I'd need 2 hands right now, easily, to count count the folks in my circles alone who are navigating multiple aspects of this process. For whatever reason, they have found themselves being the primary parent or the only parent in their home. Perhaps they're separated, divorced, perhaps they've lost a partner to death unexpectedly, and now they're finding love again. And now they're figuring out, how do I introduce them to my kids? Do we move in
Yeah.
together? How do we approach the concept of moving in? Do we get engaged? Do we get all of these things? But then we've
Yes.
also got folks who are well past that, who are like, oh, Lord, I wish I'd have known then. William, tell me
hmm
what I should have known. And now how do I fix it? Because I'm X number of years in. Right? So
Yeah.
you and I think, sing the same song about communication and connection.
hmm
And you say that communication is the number one missing piece in the process of blending families. Let's start there, and then we'll go through the points that we want to hit today.
Well, yes. So, and I would say this: communication and step parenting. I would say because of the world we live in today,
Mhm.
I would say communication, and maybe we should redefine that as conversation.
Mhm.
Um, doesn't happen the way that it used to. Our communication is, I mean, we're doing this, because you're where you are and I'm in Wisconsin. And so we're doing this way. But the actual conversations that we should have, we don't have anymore. It's
Mhm.
through our devices. It's an email, it's a text message, right? And
Mhm.
so in order for families, blended families, relationships with your spouse, your children, your parents, all that to work, you actually have to have real conversations. And
Mhm.
that is a piece that is, I believe, if you want a happy, successful marriage, I believe that is a large piece that we miss.
Absolutely. Well, and so it seems to me, and one of the things that we had talked about is that one of the first conversations that we need to have with our partner is defining the expectations. But I imagine this is
This
also a conversation that we need to have with the kids, right? Because they're a
is,
part of this family. It doesn't happen just between the adults.
well, so great question. And in the book that you mentioned, A Stranger in the Home. Um, I discuss this quite a bit. And here's why: because most people will agree that in order to be successful, that we have to be on the same page.
Mhm.
but you have to know which page you're supposed to be on in order to be on the same page, right?
Right.
you
Right.
might be on you might be on page 22, they might be on page 75. That's a problem. So the best way to do that is nobody really discusses what their expectations are, especially heading into a blended family, right?
Mhm.
If we're being honest and we're being blunt, right? When we get married, we think, oh, he is so dreamy and he's my knight in shining armor and he's going to do the to-do list and I'm going to have flowers once a week and he's going to snuggle with me and hold my hand. And he's saying, dude, this is awesome. I'm gonna have sex whenever I want it, and
All
she's gonna
right.
make me dinner. I'm not gonna have to do dishes anymore, right? So right off the bat, our expectations are somewhat
Mhm.
unrealistic, right? If we're being
Mhm.
honest. So to enter a blended family and have expectations, you have to understand that there is hurt and there is pain from the past relationship. Like you mentioned, either if it's loss or if it's a bad divorce or whatever the case may be, there is pain. And some of
Mhm.
the reason people do not talk about their expectations is because they don't want to expose their vulnerabilities and their
Mhm.
scars from their past relationship.
Right.
So they don't want to talk about the things that are difficult. And if you don't have those conversations, especially entering into a blended family, you
Mhm.
end up feeling like a stranger in the home. Not to use not to use the pun,
Sure.
but
But
you
that's
really
why.
truly do. Yeah, 100%. And so just having those discussions, and you're right, the children need to be involved. But if you are either already a step parent or you are thinking of entering that relationship,
Mhm.
that really needs to be the basis, even before, in my opinion, before the children even get involved, in
Right.
my opinion, because
Well,
that
and
is
it
important.
it seems to me that, or another way of thinking about this, you're talking about expectations. I know a coach that I've worked with talks about the difference between expectations and agreements. You know, like what
Y-
you were saying is, in a partnership, if it, and again, we're talking in a heteronormative in the language that we're using here, right? But whichever way it's
Right.
going, it's like we have these expectations of what our partner is going
Mhm.
to do, but we don't
Right.
necessarily have the conversations that get us to an agreement of how
Right.
frequency we're going to be, or how frequently we're going to be intimate, how frequently he's going to do the dishes and all the other things.
Right.
And so that's just another layer of agreement that we're going to need to enter into when we're talking about blending the families. um Talk to us about some of these conversations, like how recognizing that they're hard, right? Because they expose those vulnerabilities, and maybe it's a vulnerability, it's a place of hurt, if the other person hurt you, but maybe it's also a case of recognizing that if we're talking like an acrimonious divorce or a failed marriage, that maybe you didn't show up the way you would have liked to and you don't want to own it. So where do we start with that?
Well, so where do we start the conversation? Is that your question? How do we start the hard conversation?
Yes.
Um, so I like to call this the hard candy shell, and I prefer chocolate. So
So we're talking M&Ms
because
here.
it's right. It sounds better than building a wall. Um, and so the thing is to start the conversation, you really have to come from a place of sincere love and understanding of the other person,
Hmm.
right? We all don't want to have the hard conversation for the very reason that we talk about it. Because when we are vulnerable with somebody else, because none of us are teenagers anymore,
Hmm.
um, when we have those hard conversations, we don't want to expose our baggage and our scars, because then that means that gives that other person that opportunity to maybe turn around and use that against us, right?
Hmm.
So that becomes, we could get into, self security and self worth and all those other things.
Right.
But if it comes from a true place of love and understanding, if that really is your goal, is to have a good, solid, healthy marriage, then you make yourself have those conversations. And the best way to have those conversations is through a different form of intimacy, right? We think of intimacy and we usually refer to intimacy as having sex of some kind, right?
Mhm.
One of the biggest things about intimacy that we really forget is when you fell in love with somebody, you used to sit and you used to get googly eyed across the table from that person or on the couch. That is a
Mhm.
very strong, strong piece of being intimate with each other. So
Sure.
when you have those conversations and you're doing out of love and warmth and sincerity, not only do you get to soften that hard shell to get to the gooey center of where you want to be,
Right.
but you start to soften and become more and more intimate in a way that you didn't really realize was possible. And at
Mhm.
that point, as you start to tackle those things that are difficult, those things that are in your past, those vulnerabilities can start to disappear because you understand that person in an
Mhm.
intimate conversation. Does that make sense?
It totally does, and, I like the way that you say, like, really anchor it in the fact that I love you and I appreciate you and I support you, and I'm
Mm,
trusting you by sharing this about myself with you
yeah,
because I love you.
right. Right. I mean, because I'm gonna use a quick example if you don't mind. So
Sure.
so so for those of you who don't know, I am the step parent in this scenario, right?
Okay.
I married my wife when we started dating. The children were 3.5 to 9 years old. We had four, and two boys, two girls. So we got married, and I woke up and I had four children. That was basically my scenario. We did not live
Surprise!
together beforehand. Right. We did not live together beforehand. We got married, and I woke up and suddenly I had a family with four children. So when we talk about the love, here's what's important. Um, One of the girls at one point asked me, the children had gotten in trouble, and so I sent them to bed. But our routine was, you eat, you shower, have some TV time. They go to bed. We do prayers, so on and so forth. So one night we were in the middle of a TV program. I don't recall what happened, but um, I sent everybody to bed early. And so, but still went up to do prayers. And she asked me, she goes, "Why do you stick around?" She goes, "We're not good. We're not good." And this is a self worth thing, right? But she goes, "We're not good. Why do you love us? Why do you stay?" And my explanation to her, and this is the same thing with adults, right? I said, because my love for you is a choice. And I choose to love you and I choose to stay here to be here for you, right? Because as adults, once the emotion of being in love wears off,
Mhm.
you have to choose to love somebody else. And you have to put them first in that relationship so
Right.
that you can succeed together.
Well, and I think that's a really important point, not just when you're, all of a sudden you wake up and you have 4 children. I mean, obviously, you knew
Mhm.
that they were, your wife was a package deal, right? When you met. Like, it's
I
not like
did.
that was totally a surprise, right? But it was
No, not at
clearly a
all.
very different dynamic all of a sudden, especially for somebody who didn't have children of their own
Right,
prior. And,
right,
you walked in going like, you hadn't been through any of the your own space of dirty diapers and sleepless nights and those types of things, so you didn't have a clue of what to relate to or what you were walking into in some ways, right? Because you hadn't had that with
right,
your own
right,
kids prior. But then I think there's something else to be said, that like when you have two parents coming in where they're each bringing their own kids or their own biological children and blending together, that it's the choice in both directions as well, where it's,
right,
when you're both filling that step parent role, that you're choosing to love not only your partner and your own kids, but also the other person's kids in both
right,
directions. So
right.
I love that you anchor it in love, and that and then you clarify you have to choose to continue loving somebody. I mean, there's plenty of partners who would say, "Why do you stay?" Not just the kids, right?
Right, right, right.
You know. Um, I'm curious. I'd like to ask your thought as the step parent. I imagine one of the conversations that you had to have is what role you would play in terms of
Mhm.
discipline, because there is an aspect of you are an adult in the home. Presumably, you're contributing to the expenses in the home, and there's an aspect of like a belief of like, well, that means that you have a certain authority in the home. And then I've
Mhm.
also heard of this concept of nacho parenting. They nacho kids, so it nacho job, right? And so,
Yes,
and there's every
yes.
scale in between, right?
Mhm,
So that's, I imagine, one of the more challenging conversations for the adults to be on the same page about, and
mhm.
then incorporating the kids. So, like, how do you navigate that
So, my first
question, I
question is
suppose?
this. Well, here's the thing. Because I've got advice, and I can tell you my feelings and how we handled it. But I think anybody entering into this scenario, you have to decide this first. Do I want my marriage to be successful, or
Sure.
do I not want it to be successful? Because that's where you really need to start, right?
Mhm.
So my view and opinion on all of this and the way that it worked for us is this. Now, uh, my wife was single, raising four children. You know, her former spouse is around, but she was basically solely responsible. So the
Mhm.
natural tendency for me coming in was she wanted me to take everything over because she was worn out and she was exhausted, right? So she
Mhm.
wanted me to handle everything. That's a no-no. You can't do that
Right.
because then that breeds strife, anger within the children and everything else. But there does have to be a role. So if there's, for what you're asking me, not only does it have to be discussed, I don't, me personally, I do not like that, not my children, not that, I don't like that, because then my question is then why did you choose this? Right?
Right.
What was your reason for doing this to
Sure.
begin with? But it does have to be clearly defined, and I think all roles should be,
Right.
um, they should be shared. So when we're talking about something like discipline, I was limited as to where I could discipline. However, the one thing that we always did is we disciplined together.
Mhm.
Which, you know what, because it brought respect to me.
Mhm.
So if there was discipline handed out, if it wasn't something basic as, you got to write this so many times or you got to do this, and it got to maybe where a spanking was involved, I was always in the present, in the room, because it showed unity together
Sure.
in what was going on. And if you don't show unity, you get divided. So even
Right.
if you're two separate parents and you're bringing in children, they need to know that in some way, shape, or form that you are united. Because the biggest thing that I see from parents that enter step parent realm or whatever is, well, the children don't respect me. And
Mhm.
some biological parents don't want that step parent to have any involvement. But if you don't involve them, you really are setting yourself up for failure. I mean,
Interesting.
honestly,
Yeah.
you really are, because you can't, children aren't going to respect you, if we're being blunt, if your spouse doesn't respect you enough to keep you involved.
Fair. Yeah. Well, and I like the fact that you're talking about, with the discipline, like you've got to be on the same page. Because I know there are some families who are like, hey, you know what? Spanking isn't okay. And maybe in one family, they grew up with it, and in the other, they didn't. And so
Right,
establishing, like, hey, what is it? And again, like age of kids, what have they been accustomed to up until this point?
right,
If we have a new manner of discipline coming in all of a sudden that is drastically different, that's going to make it a
right.
challenge as well. So, what are your thoughts? Obviously, things get heated, right, between
Yep,
partners. I mean, that's just
yep,
because you're two individuals and you're going to have two different things. You can be a
yep.
united, front to the kids in arenas, but you're still going to have your own perspectives. Things get heated, things get said, things get yelled, between the partners and also with the kids. And so I know one of the things that you talk about is finding ways to keep the conversation civil and respectful, which is sometimes that's hard when we don't have the step parenting aspect in, right?
Right,
But
right,
then you
right.
bring it in, and again, it's just another level of complexity. So, what are some things that we can do to keep those conversations civil and respectful when we're ready to just punch a wall?
Okay, so this is really going to shock a lot of people, which is why I have several chapters dedicated to it in my book. Um, it's a choice. Keeping it civil and respectful becomes a choice. So if we talk about, at the beginning of our conversation, we talked about those vulnerabilities and those hurts that can be there, right?
Mhm.
If you choose not to use those as ammo to give that dig or to give that hurt or to give that tweak towards your spouse, your partner, or whoever you're with, then you have the ability to be successful.
Mhm.
So it does not mean that in the immediate heat of the moment that something doesn't trigger or whatever. It is the maturity and the ability to be able to say, okay, I need a second. And it's okay. I think our biggest issue is is we feel like everything's got to be solved right then and there.
Mhm.
And even with the children, it's okay to say, you know what, I'm frustrated right now and I'm upset with you. I'm going to come back, and like if it's a discipline issue, I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to you and let you know what's going on, right? Instead
Mhm.
of getting into that heated yelling, screaming argument. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's never happened because
Sure.
it has. I am as human as anybody else who's watching this.
Right.
But it,
Right.
but it becomes a choice to be civil and respectful and then be able to take the time to go and have that conversation where you can have that conversation where it isn't about, ooh, I got to get the last word. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
that really, it sounds simple. And unfortunately, in all of our situations, everybody doesn't see it that way, right?
Mm-mm.
My wife and I are very blessed because we are on the same page. And I
Mhm.
understand that you may be the person that says, you know what he's saying makes totally sense. I'm making a choice not to. And you know what? And your spouse might be like, what kind of crazy person did you listen to? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, and they might not be willing to follow the same rule. But certain things we can only do by example.
Mhm.
And so I believe that to begin with, you have to choose to be civil and respectful and not say things you will regret, because our single
Right.
most biggest problem is once you say it, it does not matter how many times you apologize. You cannot
Right.
take it back. And every
Right.
man on the planet knows that once it's out of your mouth, you're already in trouble.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, like, we don't have to solve it all now. We don't have to come to resolution immediately, and that it's okay for the adult to take a time out, as it were, right?
Yeah.
We've had a number of other folks who've joined us for conversations as part of Empowerthon who've given some ideas of some deep breathing that can help you in the moment when when you recognize that you are about to lose your ever loving mind,
Mhm.
breathing, saying, "Hey, I am about to lose my ever loving mind. I'm going to go
Yep.
for a
It's
walk for
okay.
5 minutes and I'll be back."
Yep.
Or,
Yep.
take some time away, dance it out, shake it out, scream it out. Just but like several folks have referenced that it takes 90 seconds for an emotion to fully process through the body. So, like, if you can take yourself out of the situation for 2 to 3 minutes, it gives some space. And not to
Yep.
say that that's enough, but like it at least gives a little bit of a bumper, right?
Right.
To then be able to come back and be like, okay, I am marginally less likely to lose my ever loving mind right now. Let's see if we can
Right.
handle this. But then also being willing to be like, you know what? Oop, it's coming up again. I need to step
Right.
away, and knowing that that's okay. And to your point, we've had several folks say that, kids are sponges. They pay attention to the way we
Yes.
behave infinitely more than they pay attention to the words that we say, except for those words that hurt. Those stick around. Like you said, they can't
Correct.
be unsaid.
Right.
So I love that so much of this, I have such a privilege of meeting so many amazing people who bring different perspectives and say things in different ways and bring different flavors, but some of the underlying breathing and intention, and we're the
Right.
adults, we're the ones with the fully formed frontal lobes. So we need to act like it, which is sometimes
Right.
really challenging. Like, just hearing it in different ways is so it's really cool to hear consistency among so many folks.
Right.
Um
Right.
the last point that you had mentioned that is important in successful conversations is knowing where and when, and I imagine how, to express frustration.
So this kind of goes to the last question. I think it is impossible to not show frustration in the moment, right? It
Mhm.
just is. Something happens and it is, you know, it's the eyebrow goes up, the jaw tenses. Everybody has those moments, so that is an impossibility. But if you are following steps and the right steps, then at least you know that you have to wait to have the conversation to
Mhm.
express the frustration,
Mhm.
right? And so when I say when and where, and again, and this isn't a blanket statement, because there are times where, if you're, we got Six Flags Great America here, right? We took the children when they were younger. So frustration when they're running off, into a crowd, that's a different form of frustration, right? You
Mhm.
have to react, you have to respond because you don't want to lose your child. So,
Well,
so,
there's an
so
immediate safety
there's
factor.
Right, there's an immediate difference there, so I wanna just make sure of that, but when it comes to those other things, these conversation pieces and things that happen that just maybe kinda trigger us, because you can be married a long time, and because we are individuals, there still can be things that happen that just kinda trigger you, and you're like, "What the heck was that?"
Mhm,
You know?
mhm,
And you wanna have that conversation. So it's knowing to be able to step back, maybe take that breath and whatever, and comprise yourself, and then finding the time to go back and have that conversation, and allow a space to be vulnerable with the other person. Because
mhm,
that term vulnerable sounds overplayed or maybe overused, but if you have the hard conversation and can explain your frustration, and your spouse, your partner, your significant other is willing to accept why you were frustrated out
mhm,
of love, then you have less and less of those conversations.
mhm,
Then you don't feel like you're walking around on eggshells, and the other person doesn't feel like they're going to be threatened every time something happens.
mhm,
um, but where I I we are an example for our children. And I agree
mhm,
with you 100% on that. Children cannot, if they are not watching you as an example and learning from you, then where they're
mhm,
going to get it? They're going to get it from
mhm,
school, they're going to get it from their friends that know as much as they do, they're going to get it from YouTube, they're going to get it from movies, right?
mhm.
So they need to get it from you. So in our home, we'll be married 14 years in July. They have seen us. I don't know that in 14 years of marriage that they have heard me raise my voice to my wife 3 times.
Wow.
And so so when we have a conversation, it's not necessarily in public. And if I'm out of line, I have learned how to apologize, not just to my wife, but to my children, because they
Sure.
have to know that I
Mhm,
also make mistakes. So to handle it, I think those frustrations, you create that space that's safe and that is vulnerable with your spouse and with your children, where you can actually sit there and allow both people to say, this is what's going on. It sounds, in some respects, it sounds a little infantile, like we're back in kindergarten, maybe, oh, go
mhm,
tell Bobby that you're sorry. But, it's one of those things that if we are sincere and have love
mhm,
about it, we grow better together
mhm.
in everything that we're trying to do, because in the end that is the entire purpose, right? Is that we are all together and we are functioning as a good solid family unit,
Right.
and it takes work. It's not
Mhm, mhm.
it doesn't just happen. It is something that we have to work on a continuous
Well,
basis.
and the other thought that that brings up for me is, when a parent says to a child, whether it's step parent, bio parent, whatever variation of adult apologizing to younger person, it shows the younger person that it's okay to make a mistake. And,
Yeah.
it's something to look at. I mean, I'm 45, my dad's looking at 80 this year, and he's never I've not only have I never had an 80-year-old father navigating his steps in life right now, he also has never had a 45-year-old daughter navigating the
Right.
steps that I am right now. And we're well past the, me being the kid, like the
Right.
child age range. But when you stop and go, like, not only did you as the dad coming into this particular situation, like, you clearly knew what you were getting into, but it was still a very big change. You hadn't been the
Mhm.
dad in that way before, nor had your wife been the mom in that way before. And recognizing that it's okay for you as the adults to make the mistakes and to show the kids, hey, I've never done this before. I've never been the
Right.
parent of a 22-year-old before, and I've
Right.
never been the
Right.
parent of this 22-year-old before. That,
Right.
I'm human and I do make mistakes. I think it opens it up for them to be willing to make mistakes as well.
100%. I mean, and look, we all know that you can learn from your mistakes, but it depends
Mhm,
on how those mistakes are guided, right?
mhm,
And it if we're successful people, we know it's okay to fail. But
mhm,
again, my biggest thing, my passion for everything that I do is to try and build the family unit, because I
mhm.
think that is, however you look at the world today, I think the family unit is a very important part of what has started to fall apart in our society.
In a lot of ways,
And
yeah.
yeah, in a lot of ways. And so if we can start in our homes and do the things we're supposed to do, then I think we can. I think there's things we can fix and at least have a place of peace and comfort
Hmm.
to be. If the world feels like it's falling apart, we have a place to go. We can go to mom and dad. We can go to each other, and
Sure.
we're in a better place.
Well, and I mean that's in alignment with a lot of what I believe through, with what we do at Parent Twin Connection as a whole is
Hmm.
that, parents are not the only people who influence kids, like you're saying, but they
Right.
are often the first line of defense in a lot of
Yep.
mental health spaces, especially mental,
Yep.
physical wellness as well, and so I'm always a proponent of how do we have conversations with kids? Because, like you said, if the parents aren't having the conversations, either the conversations aren't happening, period,
Right.
or they're happening with peers who don't know any more than your kid does, or other
Right.
people with whose approaches you may or may not agree. Not to say that they're right or wrong, but they may not be a fit for your family. And so,
Right.
the more that we can have conversations and be open to different perspectives on them, but at least start the conversations, then
Right.
the more likely it is that the kids are going to see mom and dad not just as the evil, you won't let me go to the party personality, but or you're so mean because you discipline me perspective, which
Right.
I certainly had as a kid, but also as the safe place that, like, when they do make mistakes or things happen or they make decisions that they wish they hadn't made, they know that they've got somebody that they can talk to, which is a huge piece. So
Yeah.
um
100%.
awesome. I'm so glad that you've been able to join me today. This is the point in the conversation, excuse me, that I'm going to say to folks tuning in. I warned you. There's going to be a shameless request to say thank you by making a donation to the foundation. The links are going to be open in perpetuity. So if you're listening to this 5 years from now and you've gotten something out of William's conversation today, then go ahead and say thank you. If it's $5, $500, we're not going to say no thanks. Again, our goal is to help bridge that financial gap between families and the help that they need. But we do have a little friendly contest among our participants through Father's Day here in the U.S., which is actually this coming Sunday. And the little friendly contest is that whoever our fundraising guest speaker is, we will take 20% of all of the proceeds that come in through their link, which, by the way, you can find that link in the description of this conversation anywhere that you're finding us. It's right there. But we're going to donate 20% of whatever comes in through our most fundraising guest, those are words now, speakers links, and we're going to donate it to a nonprofit that supports teens and families of their choice. And you had mentioned Redeem and Recover, is that correct? Redeem and
Hmm.
Restore.
Dream
Can
and
you tell
restore.
us
So
about
it
that and
is.
what
Well, it is a group that is part of our church group. So
okay.
where we attend church, it is one of the groups that we support, and it helps women. It's there to help women and help
Awesome.
families that are in a rough spot. So
Awesome.
we do a lot to
Fantastic.
try and give back to our community. So
Mhm. Awesome. Well, I am going to say thank you, William, so much for joining us. I'm so glad that Sarah Deacon introduced us. So shout out to the
so
conversation
am
that we
I.
had with Sarah Deacon. And I'm going to say thank you for joining us, and to folks tuning in. I hope you got some good stuff out of this. And if you are catching us on YouTube, make sure to subscribe. If you're on LinkedIn, go ahead and follow us. And if you have not yet, come on over and join our Facebook group. We have some really good conversations there. So thank you, William, and thanks to everyone listening.
Thanks, Felicia. Thank you.